Welcome back, everyone, to another episode where we uncover the most mysterious and puzzling stories in history. Today, we are stepping back in time to the late 1940s, when a quiet beach in South Australia became the setting for one of the most baffling mysteries the world has ever known. This case has puzzled investigators, historians, and curious minds for decades, and even now, over 70 years later, it still refuses to give us clear answers. On the morning of December 1, 1948, the sun rose over Somerton Beach, just outside the city of Adelaide. For many locals, it was an ordinary summer day. Families would usually come here to enjoy the ocean breeze, children played on the sand, and fishermen prepared their boats for the early catch. But that day, something unusual caught the attention of passers-by. There, lying against the seawall on the quiet stretch of sand, was the body of a man. At first glance, it almost seemed as if he was simply resting, perhaps taking a nap by the shore. He was dressed neatly in a suit and tie, shoes polished, and he looked surprisingly composed for someone found in such a situation. His posture was calm, his head slightly propped against the wall, his legs stretched out in front of him. It was so unusual that some onlookers hesitated, unsure whether they were witnessing a man in distress or just someone sleeping off the night. When authorities arrived, the scene became even more mysterious. The man had no wallet, no identification, and nothing that could reveal who he was. Even stranger, all of the labels and tags had been carefully removed from his clothing. His appearance was tidy, his outfit expensive enough to suggest he was not a drifter, yet there was absolutely no clue about his identity. The case immediately stood out. In post-war Australia, a nation still adjusting to life after World War II, news of a well-dressed stranger mysteriously found lifeless on a beach sent ripples through the community. Locals whispered about it in cafes and on trams, wondering who he could be and how he ended up there. Was he a businessman far from home, a traveler passing through, or was there something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface of this ordinary coastal town? This discovery marked the beginning of one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in Australian history. A mystery that, piece by piece, would only grow stranger with every clue uncovered, from cryptic notes to secret codes, from unexplained connections to chilling theories. But on that very first day, on the sands of Somerton Beach, all investigators had was a man, dressed to perfection, without a name and without a story. And so, our journey into the enigma of the Somerton Man begins. As investigators began to look closer at the man on Somerton Beach, the details surrounding him only deepened the mystery. Normally, when authorities come across an unidentified person, the first step is simple: check for a wallet, an ID card, or some sort of personal belonging that can help put a name to the face. But in this case, there was nothing, absolutely nothing, that could offer a lead. Every piece of clothing he wore had its tags carefully removed. The suit was of fine quality, suggesting it was not cheaply made, yet no tailor's mark or manufacturer's label could be found. Even the inside linings, where labels are usually sewn, had been cut away. This was not an accident. It looked deliberate, as if someone wanted to erase any possible trace of where the clothes had come from. The more the authorities examined his belongings, the more questions they uncovered. His shoes, for example, were polished to perfection, almost as if they had been freshly shined that very morning. His outfit was pressed, tidy, and well put together, making it seem unlikely that he had been wandering or living rough. And yet, despite his neat appearance, not a single personal item, no watch, no wallet, no hat, no money was on him. It was as though he had been stripped of any identity before he was left there. The condition of his body also raised concerns. At first glance, he appeared peaceful, with no obvious wounds or injuries. Witnesses who saw him the evening before even recalled that he looked as though he might have been drunk or asleep, sitting in the same position against the seawall. But when doctors performed an autopsy, things became less clear. His organs showed signs that suggested possible poisoning. Yet no traces of a toxic substance were detected in his system. Science at the time was not advanced enough to test for every chemical. But the absence of concrete evidence left the cause of death uncertain. This strange mix of clues: an unidentified man, in expensive clothes with no labels, with a body that showed signs of poisoning but no poison, bewildered the investigators. Rumors began to spread quickly through Adelaide. Some believed he might have been a foreign traveler caught in unfortunate circumstances. Others whispered about darker possibilities: espionage, secret affairs, or a carefully planned cover-up. For the police, however, the immediate question was simpler but no less frustrating: who was this man, without a name, without belongings? And without any clear link to local residents, he remained a complete stranger. Even attempts to match his fingerprints with records across Australia and beyond turned up nothing. By the time news reached the public, the case had already taken on an air of intrigue. A mysterious man, dressed in a suit, stripped of all identification, discovered dead on a peaceful beach. It was the kind of story that captured imaginations, and it marked only the beginning of a puzzle that would grow even more complex in the days ahead. Just when it seemed the case could not grow any stranger, investigators stumbled upon one of the most puzzling clues in criminal history. Hidden deep within a small pocket sewn into the waistband of the man's trousers was a tiny, neatly rolled scrap of paper. On it, in clean type, were just 2 words: Tamám Shud. For the detectives on the case, the discovery was astonishing. The phrase was not English, and for a moment, no one knew what it meant. Soon, scholars identified it as Persian, drawn from the famous collection of poetry the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. In English, it translates roughly to "it is finished" or "the end." The presence of such a cryptic message only deepened the mystery. Why would an unidentified man, with no wallet, no labels, and no clear ties to anyone in Adelaide, be carrying such a note? Was it a farewell message, suggesting the possibility of suicide, or was it planted deliberately, part of a staged scene meant to mislead investigators? The words themselves carried a haunting weight. The end could imply a personal decision, but it could also be interpreted as a signal, an intentional clue left behind for someone who knew how to read it. Police could not ignore the strange sense of finality in the message, and the Australian press quickly seized upon it. Headlines spoke of the Tamám Shud case, and the public became fascinated by the idea of a hidden code or secret meaning buried in those 2 words. Soon after, a major breakthrough occurred. A local man came forward with an unusual discovery. In the back seat of his parked car, left near Somerton Beach around the time of the death, he found a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. When authorities examined the book, they realized that a section of the final page had been torn out, precisely the portion containing the words, Tamám Shud. This revelation tied the mysterious scrap of paper directly to the book. But it also raised far more questions than it answered. Inside the book, detectives found something even more perplexing: a series of letters scrawled on the back cover. These letters, grouped in strange patterns, looked like some kind of secret code. Experts, cryptographers, and even intelligence agencies studied the markings. But to this day, no one has been able to fully decipher what they mean. The discovery of the Rubaiyat linked the case to poetry, philosophy, and perhaps even espionage. After all, coded messages and hidden notes were not unusual in the world of intelligence operations, especially in the tense years following World War II. Was this man carrying a spy's message? Was the book a dead drop for secrets, or was it all simply a coincidence? What began with the body of an unknown man on the sand had now transformed into a full-blown enigma. A scrap of paper with 2 haunting words, a rare book with a missing page, and a code that no one could crack. Each clue seemed to pull the case further into the realm of mystery, making the Somerton Man not just a tragedy, but one of the most fascinating puzzles of the 20th century. The discovery of the torn scrap of paper led investigators straight into one of the strangest twists of the case. That small piece with the words Tamám Shud had to come from somewhere. And now they had proof, a complete copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam with the very last page missing. But how did such a rare book end up abandoned in the back seat of a car near Somerton Beach? The car belonged to a local man who had parked it a short distance from where the Somerton Man was found. According to his account, the book was not his. He believed it must have been placed there by someone else, though he had no idea who. This strange chain of coincidences only complicated matters further. Was it possible that the man himself left the book behind before walking down to the beach? Or did someone else, perhaps a person connected to his final moments, intentionally leave the book as a clue, or even as a warning? When detectives examined the book more closely, the mystery deepened. On the inside back cover, faint impressions revealed a series of letters, arranged in what looked like a code. It was not random scribbling. The letters were grouped into patterns, with breaks that resembled words or phrases. Immediately, speculation grew that the markings could be some kind of cipher, perhaps related to intelligence work. This was the late 1940s, the dawn of the Cold War, a time when Australia, like much of the world, was caught in the shadow of espionage. The idea that this unknown man might have been involved in spy activity did not seem far-fetched to some. After all, carefully cut clothing labels, lack of identification, mysterious notes, and coded messages were all elements that fit into a world of secrecy and hidden operations. To test this theory, the authorities called on code experts and even reached out to military intelligence. Yet, despite numerous attempts over decades, no one has ever been able to definitively crack the so-called Somerton Code. Some analysts believe it may not be a true code at all, but rather a form of shorthand or even the first letters of words in a poem or message. Others argue it is too structured to be meaningless. The Rubaiyat itself added another layer of intrigue. The poetry collection, popular in the early 20th century, dealt with themes of fate, mortality, and the fleeting nature of life. For the Somerton Man to carry its final words, Tamám Shud, the end, suggested symbolism that investigators could not ignore. Was it a deliberate farewell, chosen by the man himself, or was someone else sending a message through the placement of the book? By now, the case was no longer just about a man found lifeless on a beach. It was about a puzzle that spanned literature, coded writing, and possibly even international secrets. Each discovery, rather than bringing clarity, pushed the investigation further into uncertainty. The connection between the torn note and the book found in the abandoned car was undeniable, but what it meant was something no one could answer. When detectives revealed that the copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam contained a series of strange letters, the case shifted from mysterious to almost unbelievable. These markings were not random doodles. They were carefully written, arranged into 5 separate lines. Some with repeated patterns, others with abrupt breaks. To the untrained eye, it looked like gibberish, but to investigators, it was immediately suspected to be a code. The possibility of a cipher electrified both the press and the public. Newspapers printed the mysterious letters for readers to see. And suddenly, everyone from amateur puzzle solvers to professional codebreakers wanted to take a crack at it. Was this a hidden message left by the unknown man? Could it reveal his identity, or even explain why he ended up on Somerton Beach? Authorities turned to military and naval experts, who had experience with secret codes during the Second World War. Yet, despite their efforts, no one could provide a clear translation. Some cryptographers suggested that the letters might represent the first initials of words in an English phrase, a kind of shorthand known only to the writer. Others argued that the uneven structure of the lines hinted at a personal system, perhaps a mnemonic or memory aid. Over the years, countless theories emerged. Some believed it could have been a love letter or a poem written in shorthand, meant for someone who understood the key. Others insisted it was a spy's message, crafted during a time when global tensions made espionage a very real possibility. Australia, after all, was not isolated from Cold War intelligence activity, and Adelaide was close to key military facilities. The mystery of the code soon became as famous as the unidentified man himself. In fact, it gave the case its enduring nickname, the Tamám Shud mystery. Each new attempt to decipher the letters only added to the legend. Even advanced computer analysis in later decades could not produce a conclusive solution. Some patterns seemed promising, but they always ended in dead ends. What made the code even more frustrating was its context. If it had been found on its own, perhaps it would have been dismissed as meaningless scribbles. But the fact that it was discovered in the same book linked to the man on the beach and connected to the torn slip of paper gave it undeniable significance. It could not be ignored. To this day, the so-called Somerton Code remains unbroken. It stands as a silent riddle, a possible key to understanding who the man was. Why he carried a final message in his pocket, and what events led to his mysterious end. For investigators, it was both a clue and a trap. A piece of evidence that suggested answers were close at hand, yet refused to reveal its secrets. And as the story continued, another question began to rise: if this man had no identification, and left behind only cryptic clues, then what did the autopsy reveal about his final moments? That question would lead investigators to their next disturbing realization. As investigators dug deeper into the case, the focus shifted to the autopsy, hoping science could provide the answers that the cryptic book and coded letters could not. The first examination of the Somerton man's body revealed something unusual. Unlike many sudden deaths, there were no clear signs of trauma. No stab wounds, no gunshot injuries, no evidence of a violent struggle. To the casual eye, he looked almost peaceful, as though he had simply fallen asleep on the sand and never woken up. But beneath the surface, the doctors found troubling details. His organs showed signs of congestion, especially in the stomach, liver, and brain. His spleen was unusually enlarged, and the stomach contained blood. These symptoms pointed to the possibility of poisoning. The pattern was familiar to forensic experts. Certain toxic substances could create precisely these internal effects without leaving obvious external marks. The problem was, when the toxicology tests came back, they revealed nothing. No trace of any known poison was detected. In the 1940s, laboratory testing was limited, and it was possible that modern science could have picked up something that the technology of the time missed. Yet at that moment, the absence of proof left the cause of death officially undetermined. The idea of poisoning, however, was hard to shake. Investigators considered that the substance might have been a rare or fast-acting poison, one that broke down quickly in the body, leaving no evidence behind. Others suggested that the poison could have been administered in a drink or cigarette, both of which were found near the man but gave no definitive results when tested. This suspicion of poisoning added fuel to theories that the man's death was not natural and certainly not accidental. Why would a stranger, dressed sharply with no identification, collapse in such a way on a quiet beach? If it was poison, then who had administered it and why? Theories spread quickly. Some whispered that it was a case of suicide, a deliberate act carried out with a substance chosen precisely because it would leave no trace. Others, however, leaned toward darker possibilities: assassination, espionage, or murder disguised so carefully that no one could ever prove it. The Cold War setting made these ideas even more tempting. After all, stories of secret agents and untraceable poisons were becoming more common during those years. For the police and doctors, though, the case remained frustratingly open-ended. The man's body told a story of sudden collapse, his organs hinting at something unnatural. But the absence of evidence kept them from closing the file. It was a riddle within a riddle, the clues all pointed in one direction. But none of them confirmed the theory outright. And so, the possibility of poisoning became one of the central pillars of the mystery. It explained much, but proved nothing. The case remained unsolved. And with each unanswered question, new speculation grew. If this was indeed the work of poison, then perhaps the Somerton Man was not just a stranger on a beach but someone involved in a dangerous game. One that stretched far beyond Adelaide's quiet shores. The growing suspicion of poisoning quickly pushed the case into even darker territory. This was 1948, a time when the world was still recovering from World War II and stepping into the tense shadow of the Cold War. Spies, secret codes, and covert operations were no longer the stuff of novels. They were part of everyday international reality. And soon, whispers began to spread that the Somerton Man might not have been an ordinary citizen at all, but a player in a dangerous intelligence game. The clues certainly seemed to fit the pattern. An unidentified man, dressed impeccably, carrying no wallet or identification. Clothing tags deliberately removed, eliminating any chance of tracing where he came from. A strange slip of paper bearing a cryptic message, torn from a book associated with codes and philosophy. And, most puzzling of all, a cipher-like note hidden in the very book linked to him. These were not the marks of an accident or a simple misfortune. They looked, to many, like the remnants of espionage. Australia, though far from Europe and America, was not outside the web of global intelligence. During the Cold War, Adelaide was home to key defense and military facilities, including a nearby testing ground for advanced weapons. The idea that foreign spies might operate in the area was not at all far-fetched. Could the Somerton Man have been a courier of secrets, eliminated by rivals, or was he perhaps an agent whose mission went terribly wrong? Investigators never confirmed such theories, but they could not ignore how neatly the pieces fit into the spy narrative. Poison, after all, was a well-documented method of eliminating targets in ways that left little trace. Coded notes were the very language of intelligence agencies. Even the rubaiyat itself could have been more than literature. It might have been a codebook, used for communication between operatives. As the press reported on these possibilities, the public imagination caught fire. To many, the story of a mysterious stranger on a beach was compelling enough. But the idea that he might have been part of a hidden world of espionage transformed the case into legend. It was no longer just about a man who died in strange circumstances. It was about secrets, shadow wars, and the chilling thought that Adelaide had witnessed the silent end of an international spy. Of course, skeptics pointed out that the evidence was circumstantial. No documents, no direct link to any agency. No confirmed identity. Yet, the very lack of answers kept the spy theory alive. When people looked at the Somerton Man, they saw a puzzle that fit too well into the shape of espionage to dismiss outright. And as investigators tried to trace his connections, one unexpected lead emerged: a woman living near the beach, whose name would forever be tied to the mystery. Jessica Thompson. Her story would open another chapter in this already complex enigma. As the investigation into the Somerton Man dragged on with few solid answers, detectives stumbled upon a lead that seemed almost too coincidental to ignore. Inside the recovered copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, along with the strange coded letters, police also discovered a telephone number written faintly on the back page. That number led them to a woman named Jessica Thompson, a young nurse living only a short distance from Somerton Beach. When investigators first approached her, Jessica's reaction was anything but ordinary. According to reports, upon being shown a plaster cast of the dead man's face, she appeared visibly shaken. Some accounts even say she nearly fainted. Though she quickly composed herself, her response left a lasting impression on the detectives present. It was clear she knew more than she wanted to admit. Jessica denied having any personal connection to the man. However, she confirmed that she once owned a copy of the Rubaiyat and had given it as a gift years earlier to a man she had known. That revelation set off a wave of speculation. Was the Somerton Man the same individual who had once received her book? If so, why had he come to Adelaide, and why did he end up on the beach so mysteriously? Neighbors and acquaintances later described Jessica as nervous and reluctant to discuss the case. Some believed she feared her life might be endangered if she spoke too openly. Others thought her silence suggested a personal relationship with the man. Perhaps even a romantic link from her past. The fact that the phrase Tamám Shud was connected to her old copy of the book only deepened the intrigue. In later years, when journalists and researchers revisited the story, Jessica's name would surface again and again. Some claimed that she might have been involved in intelligence work herself, either directly or through associations with people in military or diplomatic circles. Others believed the connection was far more personal, a secret romance, an unspoken past, or even a shared child. Though Jessica passed away in 2007, the shadow of her connection to the case has never disappeared. Her involvement transformed the story from one of pure espionage theory into something far more human and intimate. Perhaps the Somerton Man was not just a spy or a stranger, but someone whose final journey had led him to the doorstep of a woman he once knew. For investigators at the time, Jessica's connection provided tantalizing possibilities but no definitive answers. She refused to be drawn into speculation and offered no evidence that could conclusively identify the man. Still, her number in the book, her shaken reaction to his face, and her evasive responses made her one of the most enduring figures in the entire mystery. And so, with this new twist, the Somerton case grew even more complex, not only a story of codes and poison but now one touched by the possibility of love, secrecy, and a bond that might have crossed time and circumstance. Jessica Thompson's involvement in the case might have been brief, but it left a mark that has lasted for decades. When detectives first knocked on her door, she presented herself as calm and cooperative, but as soon as the subject turned to the Somerton Man, her composure faltered. Witnesses reported that when she was shown the bust of his face, she seemed startled to the point of losing control. Her reaction was so striking that it convinced many observers she had known him personally, even though she denied it. Jessica insisted that she did not recognize the man and had no idea why her number appeared in the rubaiyat. Yet, the way she avoided direct answers only fueled suspicion. She spoke in short replies, often redirecting questions, and appeared anxious whenever the conversation drifted toward her past. For investigators, her reluctance created a frustrating paradox. She was the only solid lead they had, but she refused to open up. Adding to the intrigue was the fact that Jessica was a nurse, a profession with access to knowledge about medicines and, potentially, poisons. Although there was never any evidence linking her to the man's death, this detail did not escape notice. In the public imagination, it became one more puzzle piece that seemed to fit too perfectly into an already mysterious story. Over time, her role in the case became the subject of countless theories. Some believed she had once shared a romantic relationship with the Somerton Man, one that ended abruptly but left behind lingering ties. Others speculated that she might have been involved in intelligence circles, whether knowingly or not, and that the man's appearance near her home was no coincidence. Jessica herself gave little away. She rarely spoke about the case after those early interviews, and when she did, her words were cautious. Family members later recalled that she seemed unsettled whenever the topic was raised. Even years later, when journalists revisited the mystery, she offered no new information, keeping whatever she knew locked away. Her evasiveness, whether out of fear, loyalty, or something else entirely, only magnified the air of secrecy around her. To investigators, she was a person of interest who never crossed the line into suspicion, a woman who seemed to hold answers yet chose silence. To the public, she became a symbol of the human side of the Somerton Man mystery, an ordinary person who might have been linked, in ways we may never fully know, to the man who died on the beach. Her reaction, shock, avoidance, and refusal to elaborate ensured that her name would remain forever tied to the story. And while Jessica Thompson passed away in 2007, long before modern DNA testing reopened the case, her presence in this mystery continues to haunt every retelling. She stands as the figure who could have unlocked the truth, but chose not to, or perhaps, was never able to. By the time Jessica Thompson's name surfaced in connection with the mystery, the Somerton Man case had already captured the imagination of the Australian public. In the late 1940s, Australia was still adjusting to a new post-war world. People were eager for stories that could explain the uncertainty of the times. But instead, they were confronted with a puzzle that offered no answers. And as the details emerged, cryptic notes, hidden books, secret codes, the story spread like wildfire. Newspapers across the country began to print sensational headlines. Articles described the unknown man as everything from a tragic loner to a possible international spy. The phrase Tamám Shud itself became a kind of shorthand in the press for mystery and intrigue. Readers followed every development closely, and the case quickly moved from being a local oddity in Adelaide to a national obsession. The more bizarre the clues became, the more the public speculated. Was the man a foreign agent left behind in a secret operation? Was he a heartbroken lover who had taken his own life in dramatic fashion, or was this an elaborate cover-up that authorities themselves were struggling to contain? Cafes buzzed with conversations, neighbors traded theories, and even children whispered ghost stories about the stranger on the beach. The case also highlighted something deeper about the post-war world, a sense that danger and secrecy lurked just beneath the surface of everyday life. Espionage stories dominated headlines in Europe and America, and now Australia had its own mystery, complete with hidden codes and suspected poison. For many, it was thrilling, but it was also unsettling. If such a thing could happen in peaceful Adelaide, what did that mean for ordinary people? Police, meanwhile, felt the pressure. Every new piece of information had to be handled not only as evidence but also as fuel for a public hungry for answers. Detectives worked tirelessly, but their inability to identify the man or explain his death led to frustration and criticism. Some accused them of withholding information. Others believed the case was too complex for local authorities and demanded international cooperation. Over the years, the fascination never faded. Books were written, documentaries produced, and theories debated on radio and television. The plaster bust of the Somerton Man, preserved after his burial, became an object of grim curiosity, often displayed in news features. Amateur sleuths and professional researchers alike pored over the case, each convinced they could spot something everyone else had missed. The public's obsession kept the mystery alive far beyond what anyone might have expected in 1948. It was not just a police file anymore, it had become part of Australian folklore. A story retold for generations. And as the decades passed, interest only grew stronger. Especially as technology advanced and the hope of finally solving the case felt within reach. But despite all the speculation, one fact remained unshakable: the Somerton Man still had no name. And for investigators, the question of identity was the key to unlocking the entire puzzle. For more than 70 years, the Somerton Man remained nameless, his true identity hidden behind codes, speculation, and unanswered questions. But in the 21st century, technology provided tools that investigators in 1948 could never have imagined. Thanks to advances in forensic science, particularly DNA analysis and genetic genealogy, the case was finally given new life. In 2022, a team of researchers led by Australian scientist Derek Abbott announced a stunning breakthrough. By carefully extracting DNA from hair preserved on the plaster bust of the Somerton Man, they were able to build a genetic profile. Using modern genealogy databases, the team traced his ancestry and connections through family trees that stretched across Australia. After months of painstaking work, they identified the man as Carl Charles Webb, an electrical engineer and instrument maker from Melbourne. This revelation changed the direction of the case entirely. For decades, the world had wondered if the Somerton Man was a foreign spy, a secret agent, or an unknown traveler who died under mysterious circumstances. Now, it appeared he was a local man, born in 1905, with ties to ordinary Australian families. Webb was known to have separated from his wife, and records showed he had relatives still living in the country. Yet, even with his name revealed, many questions remained unanswered. Why was he in Adelaide, hundreds of miles from Melbourne? Why was he found on Somerton Beach, with no identification, his clothing stripped of labels, and a cryptic message in his pocket? The DNA breakthrough solved the riddle of identity but left untouched the greater mystery of his death. For some, the discovery was bittersweet. It closed one door but opened another. Knowing he was Carl Webb gave the case a human face at last, transforming him from a symbol of secrecy into a real person with a history, a family, and a life. But it also deepened the tragedy, because the circumstances of his final moments remain just as puzzling as ever. The revelation also reignited debate about the espionage theory. If Webb was simply an engineer from Melbourne, perhaps the story was less about spies and more about personal struggles. Could his death have been the result of despair, a deliberate act of ending his own life? Or did he encounter foul play, targeted not because of international secrets but for reasons closer to home? What the DNA analysis made clear is that modern science could succeed where traditional investigation failed. It showed the power of persistence. With researchers working tirelessly across decades to keep the case alive. And while the identification of Carl Webb brought a measure of closure, it also highlighted the haunting fact that some mysteries refuse to yield their full truth. Even with his name finally known, the Somerton Man's story was far from finished. The final, lingering question still loomed large: what exactly caused his death on that beach in 1948? Even with the mystery man finally given a name, Carl Webb, the most important question remains unsolved: how did he die? The signs of possible poisoning discovered in the original autopsy still cast a long shadow over the case. His organs suggested something unnatural, yet no substance was ever detected. Some experts argue that modern forensic tools might reveal more if his remains could be tested today. But decades of time and decomposition have made such analysis difficult. Others point out that certain poisons used in the 1940s could vanish from the body quickly, leaving no trace even for today's science. If Webb was poisoned, the next question is even more complex. Was it self-administered or delivered by someone else? Supporters of the suicide theory point to the haunting scrap of paper in his pocket. Tamám Shud, the end. To them, it was a final statement, a deliberate farewell. Perhaps he traveled to Adelaide with the intention of ending his life in a place where no one knew him. But there are just as many reasons to doubt that explanation. The removed clothing labels, the abandoned book with cryptic letters, the odd circumstances of his polished shoes and tidy appearance, all these details suggest a careful staging. If this was his own choice, why go to such lengths to erase his identity? And if someone else was responsible, who were they, and what were they trying to hide? The espionage theory lingers in the background, fueled by the Cold War context of the late 1940s. Untraceable poisons, coded notes, and hidden messages were the tools of spies. Perhaps Webb was entangled in a world of intelligence and secrecy far beyond what his family ever knew. Or perhaps the truth was far less glamorous: an engineer caught in personal turmoil, whose death became magnified by circumstance and mystery. What is certain is that the case remains unresolved. Webb's name gives us part of the story, but not the whole. The Somerton Man is still, in many ways, a symbol of the unknown, an ordinary life that ended in extraordinary mystery. His story continues to fascinate because it touches on universal questions: identity, secrecy, and the limits of human knowledge. 75 years later, the image of the man on the beach remains haunting. A figure dressed neatly, lying against the seawall, with a message in his pocket that reads simply, "The end." It is as if he left the world wrapped in a riddle, daring us to solve it but ensuring that we never fully could. And so, while we now know his name, the Somerton Man remains one of history's great enigmas. Perhaps the truth will one day emerge. Or perhaps this story will remain forever, an unsolved chapter in the long history of human mystery. And that brings us to the end of today's journey into one of the most perplexing mysteries of the 20th century, the case of the Somerton Man. We have followed the story from the discovery of his body on a quiet beach, through strange clues like the Tamám Shud note and the coded letters, to the modern DNA breakthrough that finally gave him a name, Carl Webb. Yet, even with this identification, the question of how and why he died still hangs in the air, unanswered. This is what makes the Somerton Man's story so haunting. It reminds us that history is not always neat or complete. Some puzzles refuse to be solved, and perhaps that is why they stay with us. Each generation brings new tools, new theories, and fresh perspectives, but the truth continues to remain just out of reach. What do you think? Was the Somerton Man a victim of espionage, a man lost in personal despair, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear your theories. If you enjoyed diving into this mystery, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. We will continue exploring more unsolved cases, forgotten histories, and fascinating puzzles from around the world. Thank you for joining me today, and I invite you to stay curious, keep questioning, and come back for our next episode. Until then, take care, and I will see you soon.